Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's certainly exciting times, and with the stimulus package, looks like it's just waiting to be signed here, and a lot in it, a lot to unpack. So we're taking a pivot from our speaker series and diving into Mary graciously is going to lead us through orienting to the package, the highlights, of course, and then, as mentioned in the email that I sent out early this morning, looking to draft some guidance on how to use and how to interpret these funds, these categories, and what's the highest and best use, and getting your feedback on that so she can help inform some guidance that she's going to send to the Department of Ed. So, Mary, take it away. Thanks for leading us this morning.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, no, not at all. All right, sorry. Let me turn a light on. There's a little bit more of the face, although I tend to have backlighting all the time. All right. So good afternoon, I think it is. This is Mary Filardo from the 21st Century School Fund and the National Council on School Facilities. And in Washington, D.C., as it turns out, and there's been a lot going on in Washington, D.C. And so I thought it would be really helpful to get some input from you all, and also to make sure that we're kind of on the same page in terms of what's going on. So what I thought we could do is take a little bit of time to be familiar with all of the various COVID relief bills that have passed, and really focus on what they are related to as it relates to facilities. Take me back one more slide, back to the beginning. And then what I'd like to hear from folks is, what are the issues and questions that you've already been hearing from folks in your various, communities and networks or districts? I may ask if we can go around a little bit on that, but also put them in the chat. So then the other thing that I'd like to do, we actually have spoken with the Department of Education to see, will they be issuing any guidance associated with the use of these funds and facilities? And they are so swamped that we have actually gotten encouragement to try to draft guidance that we could sort of bring to them and to the community ourselves. And in doing that, what I'd like to do is think about what are the principles that we think should guide states and districts on this funding, and really work to prepare some consensus guidance that we think could be shared by the National Council on School Facilities, essentially from a state facilities perspective, and then really work on getting kind of a process to make sure that we've got it sort of well vetted for consensus, and then look for other groups and entities to kind of make statements of support for it, and then push it out. So, essentially we'll become familiar. I want to hear from you all issues that have been raised, and then I want to hear from folks here what principles you think should guide it, and just some broad strokes on the outline for the consensus guidance. And then, we can look at the kind of action items from that. So thanks, David.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next piece. So this is kind of what's out there. All right. In March, there was the first CARES Act, and that had $13.5 billion for K12 public education. And in that act, there was no provision specifically for facilities, although there was some for cleaning supplies and things like that. In the second relief package, in part from the work of the BASIC Coalition, really probably primarily from the work of the BASIC Coalition, but I suspect that some of the heating and ventilation folks have had something to do with this as well. There is specific language for the first time on these federal dollars being used for school facilities. The identical language is in this rescue plan, which was actually just signed today. The percent of the funds of the K12 education allocation that goes to LEAs is basically about 90%. This last amount has more set-asides for learning loss and other things, and so it's about 87.5% of what goes to the states has to go out to the districts by formula. And there's some interesting kind of notes on when you must spend it by, which is particularly important, I think, for facilities folks. Initially, the CARES needed to be spent by last December. That was changed to December 30th, 2021. And I'm not sure whether it still hasn't been changed. And, you know, if somebody has information on that from this call and can share with us, you know, we also want to, you know, get that from folks. The second bill in the law, it says it has to be spent by September 30th, 2022. And the American Rescue Plan says it has to be spent by September 30th, 2023. Now, what you can see on the bottom, I don't know, David, maybe make it a little bit bigger. It's that text on the bottom, just expand it so folks can see it. This is from a memo from the Congressional Research Service. Whoops, go back.
Yeah, it didn't zoom for me the way I wanted to.
Oh, well, that's okay. There's a provision called the Tidings Amendment, and it gives the education agencies an extra year. So while the law says it has to be spent by, you know, in the text itself, either September 22nd or September, 2022 or September 2023, in fact, the American Rescue Plan, at least, has districts can spend it up to September 30th, 2024, which is kind of important, you know, for how you plan. You know, what you can see is that, you know, roughly of all the $5 trillion that's gone to address the tremendous hardship, about 4% of it has been for K12 education. Let me just stop there for a second. Are there any questions or comments? Because it, you know, it's really complicated. What can I say? Is it?
Feel free to unmute. We're a small enough crowd, folks. There's just over 30, there's about 36 of us, so feel free to unmute.
So, Mary, this is Debbie White from Goochland Schools in Virginia, and I don't disagree with everything. Everything you've got here is the ESSER funded, or ESSER, yes, the ESSER part of these appropriations, and not other funding that we might have gotten gear,
right?
Or,
it's not,
or CRF funds.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not. It's the Education Stabilization Funds. It's not the governor's funds. Yep. Like, for example, the $122 billion doesn't include the $800 million for homeless that the Department of Ed has.
Right.
But you'll see. I've got the state by state and the outlying areas, kind of where it goes a little later in the presentation. But yes, that's correct. So this is really state and district controlled education dollars. So let's go to the next one, David. So there's a lot of permissible uses for these funds. And the sort of general notions are that anything that's funded under Elementary and Secondary Education Act, IDEA, Adult Education and Family Literacy, Carl Perkins, those are, you can spend on anything that you already could spend on. So that's like Title I, other kinds of things like that. But one of the things that I'm sure folks are pretty familiar with on the facility side anyway is there's a lot of prohibition about spending dollars on facilities in these other laws. There's a little bit in Carl Perkins, but like in IDEA, it's not like, oh, that says meet the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, right? It's basically staffing and services to special needs kids. But that covers a lot of territory, A, B, C, and D, okay? Mm-hmm. And then this goes on, this is really detailed, but so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but, coordination for preparedness, sort of these generic things like meeting unique needs, developing procedures, training on sanitation and spreading of infectious disease, certainly supplies for cleaning. Go ahead and the next slide. That's I. So it's a J.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's see. There we go. All of the, planning work on long-term closures in terms of meals and other supports and services, purchasing technology, providing mental health services and supports, any kind of learning loss related. And this language is specifically from the American Rescue Plan, just so you know. This is, learning loss after school, and for all of the subgroups of populations. And go on to the next one, because it's at O that this was what we worked on, getting specific language in on facilities so that there was not a question. So school facility repairs and improvements, inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrade. And then a more generic one, but strategies and public protocols, but essentially to maintain the health and safety of students, educators, and staff. So this is the language, and maybe we could stop for a minute also and say, we've already started to hear about questions like, well, if I want to, replace my roof, can I replace the roof, right? Does that fit under these definitions? And so part of what we wanted to do was really take some time today to hear from folks about, questions they may have, but also questions they may have already gotten or might anticipate, with this as the only, there is other generic language about social distancing and meeting mitigation strategies and things like that. But this is the only specific language to, really the facilities and, project improvement. So let me stop there and see kind of if we've got, what some of the issues might that you all can see already in this, or that you might anticipate from this language.
Well, if no one wants to start, I'll start. This is Bernie from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Okay. First off, my first impression of all this is basically, the federal government has given a little kid $100 bill and told them to go into a candy store. So basically, they don't quite know what they want. They want everything. And the initial questions I've had is basically, they want to spend money, but they actually don't want to actually plan or think through what they're doing or how it's impacting things. So that's sort of my first concern that I have. I'm assuming that if things are required to do some of these things, that they would be included. Like, let's say, like here, there's nothing about expanding or improving electrical systems, but to basically do some of these air conditioning and things like that, you may have to actually replace the entire electrical system. So I assume that would be fine. I'm also assuming things like roofs and things like that would be fine if they were putting, if it was part of one of the approved uses. So if they want to put rooftop units on, they would obviously have to do some roofing to basically accomplish that. But, like I said, so far the questions I've had are, we want to spend money. We want to basically do things that are, I've been telling districts, actually think about what you want to do. Because remember, you have to maintain this. So, you put something in and then you're committing to it for the next 20, 30 years to actually maintain it, the upkeep, those types of things. So I think so if I was giving guidance to any district, that's what I would basically say, plan out what you actually want to do, what your problems are, what you're trying to solve, and then actually do it correctly.
Bernie, as you were talking there, I was thinking back to the beginning of January here when Joe was on and kind of kicked off this year's series and was saying, like, first things you got to do in terms of looking at COVID response to long-term with your facility size is do an assessment of what your needs are and make a plan. First thing, assess, plan. And Joe, I was wondering if you could kind of pick up on that a little bit and build off what Bernie was saying, because I think it's absolutely right. There could be a knee-jerk spend reaction here, and if we've got a few years to spend it, then that's time. It looks like there's enough time to be a little thoughtful about it and assessing what we need, planning it, prioritizing, and so forth.
Oh no, I had a school district this morning call me, and basically they wanted to, replace their entire electrical system, put in HVAC units in each of the classrooms, and they wanted it done by this coming September. Yes. It's like, it's not a prayer. I mean, just a new switchgear takes about 12 weeks, just that from the time you order it to the time they deliver it. So, that's the impression I'm getting is basically, I now have my shiny brand new $100 bill and I'm in the candy store. So, I'm not going to think about actually what I want. I'm just going to buy everything that I can up to $100, and then we'll sort it out later. So, Joe, you have something for us?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. If there's one lesson we learned from COVID is that we didn't do proper assessments of our systems to actually understand whether they actually worked. And by the time we got to the assessment, we realized that, there were actuators that were stuck. There were a whole bunch of things that just weren't working. And I think it's important to definitely assess the situation, because a lot of our facility directors don't know what they don't know. And so, we need this money. I mean, this is something we're pushing in my state is really trying to do a robust assessment of the systems and their working. And not only that, also trying to balance these systems, just the way they are currently. So hopefully this kind of magnitude of funding will allow that to happen.
Mary, is that
right? And the thing that,
go ahead.
Yes, I think that's really helpful. I mean, remember we're at OPQ, 26 letters in the alphabet, and there are a lot of letters with other competing needs and uses, and so, I think, Joe, that your notion that assessment, but also Bernie, kind of you got a plan, are going to be important in order to kind of validate that this is the right use of, the $100 didn't get given to the facilities department, right? It got given to the school districts and to the state. And so I think that, we want to be, this is partly why I think the guidance will be helpful, because I think it can actually even improve the standing of the facilities folks if they have some sort of clarity in terms of, use it for planning, use it for assessment, and what some of the other kind of values are that maybe should guide it. Let me just go on a little bit more, and then we're going to come back to this. So there you go. So I just wanted you to have this, because we can post this on the National Council website and make it readily available. But this is sort of a handy thing from the Congressional Research Service that helps you understand. I didn't go into, there's some pretty complicated stuff on set-asides. And so that even the districts that are getting the 90% or 87.5% that they're getting, they have to set aside 20% of that for learning loss. And, you know, I think there are some elements that we could imagine that are related to school facilities, but I don't think that's what people are thinking of. And I think that we would have to think that that 20% of the LEA dollars are off the table for learning loss. I mean, for facilities.
Right.
And so I think that's an issue. So even as I think Sharon points out, which is that you absolutely could use this for outdoor learning. I don't think that the districts are going to want to take it out of their set aside. It would be from a different pot. So go on to the next.
Mary, before
next,
you,
yeah,
can I interrupt for a minute? So
absolutely.
The learning loss is sort of interesting. So, you know, we might have, we're in the process of filling out applications for the ESSER 2. And so this is the ESSER 3 money now. And so we're going to have to shift, if we have to shift all of our learning loss into this ESSER 3 to make sure we do 20%. But, you know, those people that are expanding into a summer year-round school that don't have appropriate AC, you know, I'm wondering if that might be something that was a stink bug that went across my picture there. Sorry. Sorry, I got stink bug issues here. So, you know, I agree that learning loss, you don't normally think of facilities, but you know, if your buildings don't have AC, you know, appropriate air conditioning, you're not going to be able to have a summer program.
No, and I think that's right. And I think that that is something that we can and should include in any kind of guidance, saying that there are facilities related, you know, kind of critical path facilities issues in your, in supporting learning loss programming. And it could be related to extended day. It could be related to some of the recommendations on community schools and some of the joint use that might be related to that in terms of secure access or, you know, expanding some of the spaces for health or other community services. So I think you're exactly right.
To interject on, build on that a little bit, is it safe to say in this guidance that those facility related investments are directly tied to indoor air quality and climate control and the systems that support it? Can we be that focused? Because I'm just, as everything we, you know, as you and I were talking earlier, you know, we started year ago talking about, you know, cleaning and disinfecting and all of that as a focus, and now it's the air quality stupid kind of thing. That's the issue. Can we be so narrow?
Well, I would argue that the best and this is where I think when we get into the what should be the guidance, I'd really love for people to think carefully about is flexible better, and should we try to develop an interpretation of this guidance that's really broad, or would there be better value from it if it's narrower? I'm just not sure.
That's the question behind my question. Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know if yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Deborah Norris from Arizona, the other Deborah. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Deborah.
My thoughts when I was reading ESSER 2, and I guess now we're on ESSER 3, is that those other federal programs were mentioned as allowable expenses. And if I'm right, I think I saw impact aid listed as one of those acts that figures as an allowable expense. The thing about impact aid is Arizona is heavily federally impacted, is you can do anything with those funds. So, you know, they're extremely permissible. And I'm wondering if we should just not look at we should look at the guidance for impact aid, because a great deal of those funds go into construction projects in Arizona. So in Indian country, you see these great big huge schools out in the middle of nowhere
Right.
because of these federal sources of funds. And surely there's guidance available for that. Just a thought.
Right. And I think, Deborah, it was interesting because I was just in ESSER 2, and it's a little confusing because ESSER 2 is the broad appropriation bill. And so it includes the funding for Title I and the funding for impact aid, but these are the regular appropriations. Then there's another section, which is the relief part of the appropriation. So they didn't name impact aid as one of the A, B, C, Ds. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
For the relief. So I don't think that will be the way to sort of have complete flexibility on the funding. Do you know what I mean? And that's an interesting point, and we will definitely, work to get clarification on that really specifically from like Ed and Labor staff. But my guess would be that won't be our vehicle to get complete flexibility.
Okay, that's good
because
to
it's
know.
not named.
Good to know.
Yeah,
I guess maybe the bottom line is there is a model for using construction funds with federal dollars, and it's
Right.
somewhat
I actually think that's going to be really, Deborah, I think that's going to be really important for the infrastructure bill if we're going to reconciliation and we don't have all the language in the Rebuild America Schools Act. But I think that will be very important. But not sure that it's going to help us right here. Anyway, so I know this is hard to see.
Can I ask a question? This is Cheryl.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me? I would
Yeah.
love to ask a question that's based on something that Deborah White said. So Deborah, you said something about how that 20% learning loss, you have to have some funding set aside for that. But thinking about the CARES 1, the CRRSAA, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. And so now a school district might need to use ESSER 3 for the learning loss if they don't have enough dollars kind of coming together to fulfill that. But then my understanding is you're supposed to use the dollars from CARES first and then others. So are they going to get just all messed up with the tranches of money and the applications as more information comes in? I guess I'm just asking the group, but it made me think of it when Deborah White said that.
So I know Virginia is saying we have to use ESSER 2 before we use, ESSER 1 before ESSER 2. So
Right.
I suspect they're going to say ESSER 2 before ESSER 3. But that learning loss thing, I almost want to pull summer school expenses for this year into that 20% learning loss. We're really expanding our program this year. So to me, from what I've gotten from my state guidance is I can't ask for reimbursement until I've used up ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. So I'm just going to carry those expenses perhaps for a couple of years till I wind up the other two.
Pay yourself back in a couple of years, but just have some other funds. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how else, because that 20% learning loss on that large amount of money is
Right.
a pretty hefty thing for, it's going to, we're going to be pushed to come up with that much additional expenses. Now, Mary, I'd be interested in knowing if you've heard anything about supplant versus supplement. So again, that whole idea of,
Right.
if I already had a cooling tower rebuild in my budget, but now I know I need a replacement, which is, tremendously more expensive, can I use the whole cost to replace it and ignore the fact that I had a little bit of money in there for a rebuild? It would be the same thing about a summer school. If you've always had a summer school, but this year you're just like, going gangbusters, do I still have to say, okay, I can't give the whole cost of the program because I've always budgeted something for summer school, even though it's a totally different program? So those are the
Right.
type of questions that are going to come up. If you'd always if you always had something in your budget for, you know, some amount of HVAC repair, but now you're being very systematic and proactive as opposed to reactive, you know, do you have to reduce it by what you had historically done? And
Right. I mean, that's a very good question. I think, as you well know, technically the answer would be yes. But I don't think the supplement versus supplant doesn't necessarily work on a line item basis, right? And I think, you know, that will definitely be one of the things that we will try to figure out in the guidance, is how to address it. I know that we did some work with the kind of on the capital side, because you can't like maintenance of effort, you can't, if you got 20 million from a program, you can't agree to spend 20 million every year. You don't maybe need 20 million every year. So I think when the uses are capital, it's a little bit trickier what it means to supplement versus supplant. Particularly, I don't think it should be done on a line item basis. Like, oh, well, wait, you had one kind of HVAC in there and you're upgrading to a better kind, so we're just going to do the differential. One, because you don't even really know what the one kind was going to cost you, even if you had it budgeted. And two, because, you know, it seems like there ought to be a little more flexibility on the long-term assets that you might be buying with these dollars. But I think that's a really good point to raise.
The coronavirus relief funds were very clear. They said if it's already in your budget, you can't include it. And they didn't have the supplant versus supplement. So, you know, a lot of localities used all, you know, they paid for all of their public health workers, even though it was already in the budget. So there were some funky things going on that's not typical for education that happened with the coronavirus relief funds. But I don't get the same feel for the ESSER. And I've actually raised the question to my Department of Education, my state Department of Education, to try to understand, you know, this learning loss, you know, extended programs, you know, how much can be, you know, charged if you're revamping the program.
Right. Well, and I think, and have they answered you yet?
No, they haven't. No, I'm sure everybody's trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Is the supplement and supplant language in there?
Yeah. Say that again.
Is the supplement and supplant language in the CARES Act?
Nope.
Okay,
Not
so in all three of
Not
them.
in the case. I think it is, but I will double check that, Bernie. But I think it's such standard boilerplate language. I can't imagine that it's not there, but I will double check.
Okay, because you know my issue with that in New Jersey.
No, I know. But I know New Jersey's also actually spending federal dollars, so it's overcoming it in some ways. So we'll look at it. But you know, we only have about 15 minutes left. Let's go to discussion 2, because I think we've gotten some really good input on this. And what I'm curious about is, if you were to identify the principles that would guide your guidance, you know, it's like what you'd want to hear from the district level, what you think it should be from the state level. I mean, I was playing around with what these might be. You know, like flexibility might be a principle, a speed, you know, that it's planned. I don't know. I was thinking, what would you look at? I don't know. Tim, I see your note. Sometimes we can't hear you. Can you speak up? Because I'm interested in essentially like what would be the state kind of, how is the state looking for like financial relief primarily from its other obligations, given that it's had so many, you've had to cut back on the capital program. Let's see, is Tim still here?
Yeah. I'm on, I turned myself on. I don't know, Mary, it's, I'm just now feeling, some inquiries about whether or not we would tackle some backlog of capital needs, through these funds or encourage districts. I mean, obviously a majority to all, 90% are going out to the districts for use. I think, the question are being asked here so that we could be prepared when we might start getting requests. I fielded one request so far for someone that wants to use ESSER 2 funds to do a design, $240,000 in design work for an HVAC replacement in one of their schools. And that's the only one I've specifically been involved in at the department. Facilities isn't handling that funding. It's obviously handling over on the grants and federal side.
Right. So, but clearly it seems like in the ed department there, and it is, I mean, for folks to have it in scale, this is, the total amount is essentially 10 times the Title I dollars that normally are given out nationally. I mean, it's the scale of federal dollars into the states and districts is the likes of which have not been seen. So it is an interesting question, like on the supplement versus supplant. I don't see how it can't supplant something. I don't know. I know that we're hearing from the school district here in the District of Columbia, they don't want the schools to use their school budgets to do any hiring, because they're like, okay, even if we have this for 2 years, like what's going to happen? We can't, it's like Bernie was saying, you're going to have to sustain it. So there's some real issues on that. And so, I think in terms of if you looked at a value of, fiscal, maybe it's not even responsibility, maybe it's fiscal sustainability would be one principle that had to be kind of evaluated against. And maybe that's a different thing than fiscal responsibility, which might be, is it good value for the dollars? Like if you put plexiglass on every desk and then you throw it all away in 6 months, is that fiscally responsible? Is that the best value you have for those dollars? But you see what I'm looking for here, because I think it would be good if not everything was sort of specifically defined, but that we have it in the context of some broader elements. So I'm interested in thoughts on that from folks.
Can I ask a question about the equity part?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, isn't most of this money going in through the Title I program? I guess my question is, what is more?
It's not actually it's being allocated to the states based on the Title I Part A distribution. And then it's going to the districts on the Title I Part A distribution.
Right.
But when it gets to the districts, they're not required to, there's no formula for distributing it within your district.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking about what so is that what you're worried about for equity, is basically how the districts are actually?
Well, let's just take Tim's example. This one school is going to have a new HVAC system, and that's how they want to spend their dollars. It could be that there were, 7 other schools in that district that also had poor facilities, and could have used a new HVAC system, but that one somehow got it together to, procure design services or whatever. And so if the state said it has as a value the equity, it might say, we're going to track whether or not you districts are equitably spending your relief dollars. And, they may use some of their reservation dollars to address some of those inequities, or they might, create other, I suspect, and I'd be curious to hear from some of the other states, whether or not your states are doing any regulation themselves on top of the federal dollars on how these funds should or could be spent.
Well,
You see what I'm saying? Like this.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything in New Jersey, but in New Jersey, it takes like 9 months to a year to get regulations through. So by that point, you're too far down the line.
Yeah, Joe, is that you I hear?
Yeah, in Rhode Island, 2 days ago, I had a conversation with our new governor's office about the potential of doing a statewide HVAC assessment so that it's the same metric, statewide, and then using that as a way to better distribute some of the money if possible. But I'm not sure that will happen, but that was one of the discussions. The idea of an independent, similar assessment approach to every school building gets to that equity that you talked about.
Right.
I have 2,500 school buildings. I'm not sure how long it would take to do an assessment of all of those from a state level.
All depends how many engineers you have.
We don't have any on staff, so basically
I meant consultants.
Right. Bernie, New York City's got 1,000 or 1,100 schools, and they've got assessments of every one of their ventilation systems.
Doesn't New York do them every 5 years?
Yeah, they do. But they've updated all of the assessments of their classrooms. So it's doable. It's a lift, but I think it is doable. And California, if it had the mind, I don't know. I see. Is Rob? Are you still here from California? Where are you, Rob? Let's see if I can find Rob.
Hey,
There's Rob Corley. Hi, Rob. Are you there? Can you speak? I see him on the list, but he might not
I think
be.
We barely hear you, Rob. Can you turn your volume up a bit?
We seem to be having audio problems with this computer.
We can hear you just barely, but we can hear you a bit.
Yeah, I can't hear him at all, actually. So I was just curious, what in California, whether, there's other legislation that from the state that's gone through, and whether or not they're thinking, they didn't need to put $2 billion into ventilation with the federal dollars coming.
Yeah, maybe right, because they did have that supplemental bill passed just last fall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
this is Josh in Colorado. I just back to your discussion number 2 here about, I think one of the things that you mentioned as far as guidance goes to the districts around sustainability is something that's really important and something that should be advised to the districts, is to make sure that you don't go out and invest in a bunch of things that you're not going to be able to maintain, like Bernie says, or that you're not going to use. in 6 months from now, what will our landfills look like full of plexiglass or whatever? I don't know what that would be. I know, there was a global shortage of plexiglass here. So I do think sustainability would be a good bullet on that list. And that goes for fiscal sustainability as far as, and so when I go down that road, I think of, do we have the staff to maintain what we purchase? Or do we have the finances to hire contractors to maintain what we purchase? And then on the flip side of that coin is, do we have the funding to maintain the utility bills that are associated with additional air conditioning? Our electric will go up if we don't have air conditioning and we add air conditioning, or if we install higher MERV 13 or HEPA filters into our HVAC system, our electrical load is going to go up to overcome the load, the static pressure. So all these things need to be considered. We were looking at 25% electrical increase to bump up to MERV 13 filters. For us, that's a $750,000 bill.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's huge.
And the other,
no, I think, go ahead.
The other note that I had here was for districts to seek advice. A lot of districts don't have the in-house support to be making decisions about investments that they aren't knowledgeable about. So there's a lot of support out there, and I think of that list of bullets there you have, and to seek support or seek advice on how to invest this funding wisely is seeking advice is good advice.
Right. Yeah, those are great additions, actually. And so what about flexibility as in terms of the interpretation of the guidance? I mean, do you think it's better for folks on the ground who actually have to, implement and, seek the guidance and do the projects? Is flexibility, will that help them get the money, get the help they need, and or do you think that actually it would be more helpful if the school districts had, like, okay, here's the list of the 20 kinds of projects that are sort of good, sustainable, good, fiscally responsible, kinds of projects in this to use these funds for? I'm curious what people think about that.
Hey, Mary, this is David Lewis from ASBO International.
Yeah, hi, David.
Hi, I'm sitting in for Elika today.
Oh, fantastic.
I just thought I'd jump in on that one because when you mentioned it earlier, flexibility is definitely something that would be a consistent theme and need that we're hearing from our members. Because if you look at all of these different things, right? I mean, every school district has their own different priorities that they're looking to try to address. And the fewer, recommended, items, the fewer things that they have to use it for, and the more flexibility, I think, would be an important point to emphasize.
Right. So I think that's a, that would be a value in terms of kind of how to get, I mean, in some ways, to me, the flexibility gets you better value, better sustainability, because, if you think, oh, I'm going to lose this money if I don't spend it on X, but I really need Y, that's a bit of a problem, right?
Yeah, Mary, and David, and to build off what David was saying, and kind of couple that with a comment Jeff made in the chat box about plexiglass and Josh's comment about the dumpsters and landfills full of plexiglass now, because we all slapped those up last, May, and that's not really effective at all, except for, mildly psychologically effective. And so to couple that flexibility with some guidance about what's actually effective in to improve healthy building environments, specifically indoor air quality, and maybe a handful of other things, like flexibility in the strategy to how to achieve a goal, but maybe focus some of the specific guidance on what goals are recommended that you aim for, in terms of healthy building environment, and what we know, what we think we know, what we think we know. Like, should we be social distancing is not gonna, 6 feet is not gonna be here for 2 years. So like expanding our capital infrastructure and capital needs to accommodate a temporary strategy would run counter to our sustainability guidance. So then it's like maybe we need to provide some direction about what goals might be recommended to aim for.
Well, I think part of the assessments that the districts would have to make is basically what pieces of this are temporary, let's say, for the next year or two, versus which ones are basically the longer term permanent things that are going to be, those are basically going to be the things they're going to have to maintain and need to be, sustainability issues. So that's, in flexibility, I think it's basically both of those things of what is temporary, because what happens if assuming that, the world works right for a change and everybody gets vaccinated by the end of the year, some of these projects won't even be built until after that fact. So the flexibility to basically pull back and redo things would be very helpful.
And I think through the context of along with like best practices, right? I mean, that kind of gets to, you don't have to do this, but here's what we're learning, and here's a range of things, like what Bernard say, like, we kind of learned as sort of a best practice, right? That didn't work or wasn't necessary, or the more we thought about it, or the more after we had done it, we had to phase it out. And so that's, like a best practice. Don't do that. But flexibility within the context, I think our people do the best when you show them what works and what doesn't work, and let's learn from each other as to, mistakes made and victories gained. Where do we fall within those, categories?
Right.
So Mary,
the final thing, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think your list from a division perspective, as they get their money, to have this type of list to say this is what we are expecting people to do is a really good thing. I really like the list. I think it's a good list. One thing to address the gentleman from Colorado is, what if all of our extended learning things jack up those operational costs? Can those operational costs, additional operational costs, be part of this funding? I mean, we're going to be paying for extra teacher time, extra whatever, but all of our facilities are going to be more heavily used the more you extend your learning opportunities, outside of the normal school day. So that would be interesting as to whether those additional facility costs can also be included, like electricity or gas or whatever you're using.
I think the question is, what happens after 2023 or 2024 when the money's gone, and now the school district has to basically pay that bill? I will tell you what will happen in a lot of districts. They just won't maintain the stuff, and then basically, instead of a 30-year lifespan on an HVAC system, they'll basically be lucky if they get to 15, and then they have to replace it. And so, I've seen that happen here in New Jersey, where they just they get it up front, and then they can't maintain it on the long term, and 15 years later the boiler is shot because they never maintained it.
Right. So So we're at 4:03. So what I want to do, go to the last slide,
Okay.
David, because this is what I'd like to propose, that we have kind of these action items. What I want to do is take the comments and the sort of the due diligence that we've been doing for the National Council and prepare a draft of a consensus guidance document. It would have some values, it would have some goals, it would have, I think, some examples of, you know, kind of projects and kind of rationales why they would fit under these principles and goals. You know, even maybe examples of things that probably wouldn't fit under those, and get it out to you all for in a Google Doc, and just get comments back, and then we'll revise it based on the comments, and then we'll actually take a revised draft, which, you know, I can send out again. But I think ultimately what I would really like to see is the National Council board, you know, kind of agree to a process, vote on it, and then the National Council would take you know, it's obviously a totally non-binding document. It has no real authority whatsoever, but it has sort of the authority of thoughtful people having considered it and folks looking at it. So does that seem like yeah?
Just calling it, I mean, just thinking here on the fly, could we just saddle up again next Thursday and just dedicate next week's conversation to just following up, and we take this information, draft it up, and come back and continue next Thursday?
We totally can. I can get out a draft ahead of time, and then folks can, you know, take their shots at it at the next Thursday, and you know, I think that would be fine. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, we'll do that.
Because there's definitely more that I could use from folks here, but I think we should, you know, out of respect for everybody's time, we should close out now.
Okay. So again, Mary, thanks for putting this together. What I'm going to do is, those of you who are on this meeting right now, I'll pull the participation list just for this meeting, and we'll send an email out to all of you who are here today with, you know, the message specifically, and then see if we can come back. You know, we'll just have a reboot on this conversation, and I'll send you, you know, Mary and I will send you the link to the Google Doc as it's created here. Please, as you get that, if you have time to look at it before next Thursday and provide some thoughts. And then, you know, some of the high level notes, Mary, I'm taking, like, supplement versus supplant, what kind of language would make sense, sustainability versus flexibility. What's our dance there? How do we navigate that? Data collection and assessment and planning. What kind of guidance can we put on that? And to Nathan's question here, maybe wrap it up with this. Nathan, I think, asked a great question, which is, you know, how much is this going to get attention on the facility side, given the you know, the need to focus on teaching and learning, and the need to echo to focus on that. And I think maybe one of our goals here is just to say, when you are using it, you know, approaching your OPQs, your capital investments, this is what, you know, we recommend, and just give people some specificity there.
Right.
And
I
a lot of
think
knockdown, drag out brawls in school districts over the money.
Well, I think what we want to do is have a thoughtful approach for the facilities needs as they support learning loss, and also as they support the health requirements, because, you know, remember, there's still a whole set of CDC guidance out there, and in order to operate in accordance with those, there's still some you know, real there's a bit of a lift there. So, you know, if you can't open your windows, because they're so old and they've rusted shut, or you've got them nailed shut because they fall. Those are real issues, and you know, these funds could address that. So anyway, we'll take a shot at this document and we'll get it out to folks, and then we'll have an opportunity to review it next week, which would be fantastic. Really appreciate the input. It's critical. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Till next
David.
week. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Bye-bye.